After the author establishes his theory of multiple intelligences, his research leads him to ask, are there more? And he comes up with three different types of intelligences to cover in chapter 4. There are a naturalist intelligence, a spiritual intelligence, and an existential intelligence. A naturalist intelligence simply means that a person can be predisposed to charting and recognizing and logging kind of all of the differences in the natural world. That this type of intelligence can exist specifically in certain types of people. There's no reason why children are drawn to playing with dinosaurs, but some can be drawn, especially in a scientific manner, to be able to study those kind of different genres of animals. The second additional intelligence that the author wants us to consider is spiritual intelligence. He concludes that because it's so important to human beings and that there are different kind of levels of involvement in a spiritual organization, that there are intelligences inherently within this particular structure. And so he talks about how a lot of intelligences, there's a senses of knowing how and knowing what as two different types of kind of levels of intelligence within a particular field, and that for all the rest of them it's pretty straightforward, spatial patterns, music. But for the spiritual world, it's not so cut and dry. You can have the actual knowledge of what's happening in a particular spiritual field, but the actually performing the I know how to do certain things, that is a little bit more difficult to show in the spiritual realm. There are people that go into mystic trances and can affect themselves very deeply, but then others argue and say that that isn't a true sign of intelligence because you're not producing anything, you're not interacting with anyone. So spiritual intelligence is an interesting one for him to cover, but I'm not really decided one way or the other. The final intelligence covered in chapter 5 and the author's 8th criteria is existential intelligence. This is the belief that there are larger forces at play in our lives that some people can tap into, and that this particular intelligence is something that is unique in kind of like almost like religious and spiritual type world. The author mentions Gandhi as a case, alongside with Albert Einstein as cases of people who have acute senses of this type of intelligence, a connection with something that's almost beyond the time, and even suggests that early human species must have or could have rather dreamed about what the meaning of death, or what might happen after they transitioned, and so these subjects have been thought about and talked about for quite a long time. And so his 8th criteria being existential intelligence, probably one of my most favorite intelligences thus far. The last intelligence considered here will be in chapter 6, where the author considers a moral intelligence. He spends the first bit of this chapter, and I believe rightfully so, arguing against a moral intelligence, speaking that facts and other kind of measurable markers of intelligence are kind of decision-free. They're neutral as far as right and wrong. That people can know certain things and know how to do certain things, but what they choose to do within their particular social setting determines kind of who they are, but more kind of I guess morally, or within a right and wrong sense. That I agree with completely, kind of way more of a scientific view on the intelligence. But he lends a lot of credit to it as far as how it relates to emotional intelligence and existential intelligence. How in the spiritual intelligence he talks about, which is very most obviously linked to religion. How if you can think about these things that are greater than yourself, where you came from, what you do, how it affects other people, if that proclivity of thinking like that, if it sets you up to be measured as a particularly intelligent person in that field, being that kind of spiritual and moral. So I think he's undecided, but for the most part against more a moral subcategory being put onto intelligence. That it should be more in in the decision free, as I said, more of the free of right and